There's a building on the north shore of Lake Tahoe that hasn't opened its doors in over a decade. It sits on 13 acres at Crystal Bay, right where the California-Nevada state line cuts through the property like a scar. The line runs through the main lodge. It once ran through the swimming pool. Guests could paddle from one state into another without lifting their heads from the water. Inside the Indian room, it was painted right on the floor. You could stand with one foot in California and one in Nevada, a drink in your hand, the law bending around you like the rules were just a suggestion. That was the point. That was always the point of the Cal Neva. Today, the lodge sits behind a chain-link construction fence. The cabins overlooking the lake, the ones where the most famous people in America once slept, drank, fought, and kept secrets that would follow them to their graves. Those cabins are condemned now. Bears were found living in them. Asbestos in the walls. Structurally unsafe, the engineers said, at serious risk of catastrophic collapse. One of those cabins, Cabin 3, is where Marilyn Monroe spent the last weekend of her life. It's slated for demolition. The tunnels that ran beneath the property, the brick-lined, carpeted passageways that once carried Frank Sinatra from his office to the stage, that let mob bosses move like ghosts beneath the feet of unsuspecting guests. Most of them have been filled in with concrete. The ones that remain are too narrow, too dark, too far from code to ever serve any purpose again. Maybe a wine cellar, the current owners say. Maybe a tasting room, the celebrity showroom where Sinatra performed, where Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. and Ella Fitzgerald played to a room of 350 people who, on any given night, might have included a sitting president's sister, a Mafia don, and the most famous woman in the world. The acoustics in that room are still perfect. Sinatra made sure of that personally, but the room is empty now. The red velveteen booths are gone. The liquor bottles that bristled on every table, the cigarette smoke, the brass section warming up, all of it gone. What remains is the architecture of a place that was built for noise, holding nothing but silence. Every piece of memorabilia from the Sinatra era has vanished, lost in the shuffle of 6 different owners over 60 years, each one arriving with the same promise. We'll bring it back to its glory days. Not one of them succeeded. We tell the stories of what America built and how it fell apart. If that's your thing, subscribe. More of these are coming. Now let's get back to the story. And here's what you need to understand about the Cal Neva Lodge, the thing that separates it from every other abandoned casino, every other shuttered resort, every other ruin with a famous name on the deed. The Cal Neva didn't die because the market shifted. It didn't die because people stopped coming to Lake Tahoe. It didn't die because a corporation made bad spreadsheet decisions in a boardroom 1,000 miles away. The Cal Neva died because of a friendship. One friendship between the most famous entertainer in America and one of the most dangerous men alive. A friendship that couldn't exist in the sunlight. A friendship that required tunnels. And the story of how that friendship built something extraordinary and then destroyed it in a single summer starts not with Sinatra, but with a San Francisco real estate man, a plot of land on a lake, and an idea about what happens when you build a place where the border between two worlds runs right through the middle of the floor. In 1924, a wealthy San Francisco real estate developer named Robert P. Sherman came to the north shore of Lake Tahoe and saw something that most people missed. The land around the Nevada side of the lake was selling for $1 to $5 an acre. The mountains were remote, the roads were rough, most of the property was raw, undeveloped, surrounded by pine forests that dropped down to a lake so blue it didn't seem real. Sherman convinced his business partners, Spencer Grant and Harry Comstock, to buy up everything they could. They weren't thinking about casinos. They weren't thinking about entertainment empires. They were thinking about selling lakefront property to their wealthy San Francisco clients. The lodge they built was just a guest house, somewhere to bring the buyers, somewhere to pour drinks and close deals. By 1926, the first cabin was finished. It straddled the state line, a rustic log structure inspired, some say, by The Cabin, in a popular 1925 film called Lightning, which starred Will Rogers. It was modest, it was charming, and it sat on a geographical curiosity that would define everything that came after. Half the property was in California, half in Nevada. 2 sets of laws, 2 sets of rules, 1 building. Nobody planned what happened next. Sherman sent a young salesman named Norman Henry Biltz up to the lake in 1927 to sell property. Biltz was handsome, persuasive, and relentless. He sold so much land that Sherman eventually deeded the Cal Neva to him in lieu of commissions owed. Biltz would become known as the Duke of Nevada. He married into the Auchincloss family. His wife was the granddaughter of a Standard Oil founder, and through a tangle of American aristocracy, an aunt of the woman who would one day become Jacqueline Kennedy. The threads that connected the Cal Neva to power were being woven before the lodge even had a proper name. Under Biltz, gambling arrived. In 1928, a man named Bill Doyle leased the property, and introduced roulette wheels and card tables. This was 3 years before Nevada would officially legalize gambling. The state line gimmick became the Cal Neva's first great trick. When county sheriffs raided from the California side, guests simply moved to Nevada. When they came from Nevada, everyone stepped into California. The border wasn't just a line on the floor, it was a magic act, a disappearing act, and it attracted exactly the kind of people who needed one. By 1930, the lodge had been sold to Bill Graham and James McKay for $65,000. Graham and McKay ran much of Reno's underworld. Their associates included Babyface Nelson and Pretty Boy Floyd, who occasionally worked as bodyguards on the property. A man named Redder ran the casino floor. Card cheats, the stories went, left with broken arms. The Cal Neva was barely 4 years old, and already the rules inside its walls had nothing to do with the rules outside them. That same year, an actress named Clara Bow, the It Girl of silent film, gambled at the Cal Neva and ran up a debt of $13,000. That's roughly $250,000 in today's money. When the casino came to collect, Bow claimed she'd thought the $100 chips were worth 50 cents each. The story hit the national papers. It was the first time most Americans had ever heard of the Cal Neva Lodge. It wouldn't be the last time the place made headlines because someone famous did something reckless inside its walls. 5 years later, in 1935, a teenage girl named Frances Gum performed at the Cal Neva. An MGM agent was in the audience. He signed her. She changed her name to Judy Garland and became one of the most famous entertainers of the 20th century. Decades later, Garland would return to the Cal Neva as a guest of Frank Sinatra. Full circle, back to the place where it all started for her, now owned by the man who'd transformed it into something she couldn't have imagined as a girl singing for strangers on a summer night. Then the lodge burned down. On May 16, 1937, a fire tore through the Cal Neva and destroyed everything. The walls that had been adorned with stuffed wild animals, the indoor stream stocked with rainbow trout meant for dinner, the card tables, the bar, the rustic charm that had drawn the famous and the dangerous to a log cabin on a lake. Arson was suspected. No charges were ever brought. What happened next tells you everything about what the Cal Neva was and what it would always be. 500 men were hired. They worked day and night, and in 30 days, the lodge was rebuilt. 30 days. The new structure cost $280,000 and included the Indian Room, with its cathedral ceiling, exposed timber beams, and massive stone fireplace, the Circle Bar, and the main casino area. These spaces would survive into the 21st century. The Cal Neva was born, burned, and reborn in barely a decade. It had already hosted gangsters, bankrupted a movie star, launched the career of Judy Garland, and risen from its own ashes. And the most famous chapter of its life hadn't even begun. For 2 decades after the fire, the Cal Neva passed through hands the way chips pass across a card table, quickly, without much ceremony, and with the sense that the next hand was always the one that would change everything. Sanford Sandy Adler bought the lodge in the mid-1940s, built the Wigwam Room, and dropped the hyphen from the name. In 1946, band leader Xavier Cugat was paid $22,000 for a 2-week engagement, reportedly the first nationally famous act to perform at the Cal Neva. Then Adler was gone, and in 1955, a group led by Bert Wingy Grober purchased the property for $1 million. Grober's tenure mattered for one reason that had nothing to do with gambling. He was close friends with Joseph Kennedy, the father of John, Robert, and the rest of the Kennedy clan. Joe Kennedy was a supplier of liquor and steaks at Grober's Miami Beach restaurant, and through that friendship, the Kennedys became regulars at the Cal Neva. JFK and Bobby visited throughout the late 1950s. The lodge even served as accommodation during the 1960 Winter Olympics at nearby Squaw Valley. The Cal Neva was becoming what it had always been inclined to become, a place where the powerful came to play, away from the cameras, away from the rules. And then Frank Sinatra walked in. Sinatra had history with Lake Tahoe, complicated history. In 1951, he'd come to Reno to establish residency for divorcing his first wife, Nancy. During that trip, he overdosed on sleeping pills at the Cal Neva. It made the national papers. He was 35 years old, his career was in a trough, and the lodge on the lake was, for a brief dark moment, the place where Frank Sinatra almost ended. But by 1960, Sinatra was a different man. He'd clawed his way back, won an Academy Award for From Here to Eternity, recorded the albums that made him the defining male vocalist of the century, formed the Rat Pack with Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford, starred in Ocean's 11, produced President Kennedy's inaugural gala. Frank Sinatra, in 1960, was arguably the most connected human being in America, linked to Hollywood, to the White House, and to the Chicago outfit, all at the same time, and he wanted a kingdom. On July 13, 1960, the same day John F. Kennedy accepted the Democratic nomination for president, Sinatra purchased a 25% stake in the Cal Neva Lodge. The timing was probably coincidence, but in the story of the Cal Neva, everything that looks like coincidence starts to feel like fate. Sinatra's co-investors included Dean Martin and, critically, Sam Giancana, the head of the Chicago outfit, the successor to Al Capone, a man who had been arrested more than 70 times, a man whom authorities believed had ordered the murders of more than 200 people. Giancana reportedly provided Sinatra with a loan of $1.75 million to refurbish the property. Many historians believe Giancana held a hidden ownership stake in the Cal Neva, with Sinatra serving as the public face of a mob-funded operation. By 1962, Sinatra's ownership had grown to 50%. He hired Paul "Skinny" D'Amato, a connected Atlantic City nightclub operator, to manage the property, and then he went to work. The renovation was Sinatra's vision made physical. He built the Celebrity Showroom, a 350-seat theater with acoustics he personally oversaw, a stage designed for the kind of show he wanted to give, the brass section cooking, the slow ballads breaking hearts, the boozy patter between numbers that made every audience feel like they were at a private party. He installed a helipad on the roof, his personal landing pad. Sinatra had dreams of building what he called Sinatra's Shangri-La, a helicopter shuttle service between the Cal Neva and Reno, flying high rollers between two playgrounds, and he built the tunnels. Beneath the lodge, Sinatra excavated and expanded a network of underground passages, brick-lined, carpeted, connecting the showroom to his office to the heliport to the lakeside cabins. The official explanation was privacy. Celebrities could move between the showroom and their bungalows without being spotted by fans or paparazzi, and that was true as far as it went. But the tunnels served another purpose, a darker purpose, a necessary one, if you understood the arrangement that made the Cal Neva possible. Sinatra reserved 3 cabins with the best views of the lake. Cabin 5 was his. Cabin 4 was for friends. Cabin 3 would become the most famous and the most haunted room in the history of Lake Tahoe. By 1963, the Cal Neva had grown to 11 cottages and 55 rooms. The lodge was open year-round for the first time in its history. And what Sinatra had built in barely 2 years was unlike anything Lake Tahoe had ever seen or would ever see again. Imagine a summer evening at the Cal Neva Lodge, 1962. You arrive at Crystal Bay as the sun drops behind the Sierra Nevada, and for a moment the lake turns from blue to gold to something there isn't a word for, the color of a place that seems too beautiful to be real and too remote to be corrupted. But the Cal Neva was both. That was the trick. That was always the trick. The parking lot is filling, Cadillacs and Lincolns catching the last light, men in suits, women in cocktail dresses, the rustle of expensive fabric against the mountain air. You walk through the entrance of the lodge, and the first thing you feel is the temperature change, the cool of the evening replaced by the warmth of bodies, of lights, of a building that's alive with the particular electricity of a place where famous people do things they wouldn't do anywhere else. The Indian Room is to your left, the original heart of the lodge, rebuilt after the fire with its cathedral ceiling and the massive stone fireplace that anchors the space. The state line is painted on the floor. Guests make a show of stepping back and forth, 1 foot in California, 1 foot in Nevada, a party trick with legal implications that nobody takes seriously, because at the Cal Neva, the law has always been more of a suggestion than a rule. The Circle Bar is straight ahead, the social center, where the drinking starts and the real conversations happen. And beyond that, the Celebrity Showroom. 350 seats, red velveteen booths, tables already crowded with bottles and glasses, the air thick with cigarette smoke and perfume. That particular cocktail of glamour and vice that defined every room Sinatra ever owned. Tonight, the chairman of the board is performing, and the room is full of people whose names you already know. On any given weekend during the summers of 1960 through 1963, the Cal Neva's guest list read like a casting call for the most consequential people in mid-century America. Sinatra opened and closed every season himself, but between his performances, the Celebrity Showroom hosted Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Vic Damone, Ella Fitzgerald, Tony Bennett, Eddie Fisher, and the Maguire sisters. These weren't performers slumming at a lake house. These were top-tier acts playing a 350-seat room because Frank Sinatra called and asked them to, and you didn't say no to Frank. In the audience and in the cabins, in the Circle Bar and at the tables, Judy Garland, who'd been discovered on this very property as a teenager decades earlier, now returning as a guest of the man who'd remade the place. Liza Minnelli, Kim Novak, Shirley MacLaine, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, Richard Crenna, Peter Lawford, Sinatra's Rat Pack companion, and more importantly, the brother-in-law of President John F. Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. We'll get to Marilyn. The shows were something visitors never forgot. Sinatra swaggering across the stage, the band cooking behind him, the audience close enough to see the sweat on his brow when he leaned into a ballad. Between songs, the patter, loose, boozy, sharp. Sinatra knew every face in the room and played to them. A joke for Dean, a nod to Sammy, a lyric delivered right to someone's eyes with a look that said everything that couldn't be said out loud. The acoustics were perfect. Sinatra had made sure of that. A room designed for his voice, in a lodge designed for his life, on a lake that seemed designed for the kind of man who wanted the world to come to him rather than the other way around. After the shows, the real Cal Neva came alive. The casino on the Nevada side hummed with action. The clatter of chips, the murmur of dealers, the particular nervous energy of a room where money changes hands quickly and quietly. In the circle bar, the drinking continued into the small hours, and in the cabins, in the tunnels, in the spaces the public never saw, the private Cal Neva operated by a different set of rules entirely, because beneath all the starlight and the music and the mountain air, a shadow moved. Sam Giancana, the head of the Chicago outfit, Al Capone's successor, a man on Nevada's Black Book, the list of excluded persons, a roster of 11 men banned from entering any casino in the state. Any casino owner who allowed a Black Book member on the premises risked losing their gambling license. The rule was unambiguous, the consequences were clear, and yet Giancana was a constant, sheltered presence at the Cal Neva. This wasn't a casual arrangement. Giancana had funded Sinatra's renovation of the lodge, the $1.75 million loan that built the celebrity showroom, the tunnels, the helipad. That money came from Chicago. Many historians believe Giancana held a hidden ownership stake, with Sinatra serving as the legitimate front for a mob-funded operation. Whether or not that's precisely true, one thing is certain. Sinatra was in no position to tell Giancana he wasn't welcome. So Giancana came and went, in the cabins, in the tunnels, away from the casino floor, where his presence would have been a felony. He moved through the Cal Neva like a ghost, a man who technically didn't exist on the property, invisible to every ledger and guest list, but known to everyone who mattered. His girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire of the McGuire sisters, performed in the celebrity showroom. Giancana watched from the shadows. The tunnels that Sinatra built for celebrity privacy became operational infrastructure for hiding the most dangerous man in Chicago. And this was the Cal Neva's essential nature, its defining contradiction. The most glamorous address on Lake Tahoe, and the darkest. The showroom glittering with star power, and the tunnels running beneath it with something else entirely. The same cabins where Marilyn Monroe sat in the front row cackling into champagne were the cabins where a man who'd ordered 200 murders held court with his girlfriend and his bodyguards. A federal investigation in 1962 would find evidence of a prostitution ring being run from the Cal Neva's foyer. That detail tends to get lost in the glow of the Rat Pack stories and the Kennedy rumors. But it belonged to the Cal Neva as much as the showroom did, because the Cal Neva was never one thing. It was always two things, the surface and the underneath, the show and the shadow, the California side and the Nevada side, divided by a line that everyone pretended mattered and nobody actually respected. The Cal Neva didn't just attract power, it concentrated it. The Kennedys had been coming to the lodge since the 1950s, when Joe Kennedy's friendship with owner Wingy Grober made it a family retreat. Under Sinatra, the connection deepened into something more intense and more dangerous. Peter Lawford was the bridge, a Rat Pack member married to Patricia Kennedy, the president's sister. Through Lawford, Sinatra had access to the White House. Through Sinatra, the Kennedys had access to a world they couldn't publicly acknowledge. The details of who visited the Cal Neva and what they did there have been debated for decades, layered over with rumor and speculation until fact and legend blur together. What's documented is this: members of the Kennedy family visited during Sinatra's ownership. What's legendary, and probably apocryphal, is the rest. Stories about JFK and Marilyn Monroe in the tunnels. Stories about Sinatra sending his helicopter to Sacramento to pick up whichever Kennedy was in town. The Cal Neva was the kind of place that generated these stories simply by existing, because the people inside its walls were the people America was watching, and the walls were thick enough to hide almost anything. What's also documented is this: by early 1962, the arrangement was fracturing. Bobby Kennedy's Justice Department was actively investigating Sam Giancana. J. Edgar Hoover was tracking Giancana's movements and, by extension, tracking the Cal Neva. Hoover had lunch with President Kennedy and reportedly discussed Sinatra's mob connections. The FBI director played hardball, and Kennedy knew it. Staying close to Sinatra meant staying close to Giancana, and staying close to Giancana meant giving Hoover ammunition. In March 1962, JFK was scheduled to stay at Sinatra's Palm Springs estate during a trip to California. Sinatra had built a helipad for the president's arrival. Another helipad, another dream of connecting his world to the most powerful man on earth. At the last moment, Kennedy cancelled. He stayed at Bing Crosby's place instead. Sinatra was devastated. Years later, he'd say he would have understood if Kennedy had simply explained the political reality, that a president couldn't be seen as a guest of a man who did business with the mob. But Kennedy never had that conversation. He just stopped coming. And Sinatra, who'd produced the man's inaugural gala, who'd believed the friendship was real, who'd thought the Cal Neva could be the place where Hollywood and the White House met on equal ground, Sinatra carried that wound for the rest of his life. The break with the Kennedys didn't destroy the Cal Neva, but it weakened the arrangement that held it together. Sinatra was still connected to the White House through Lawford, still hosting Kennedy family members, still operating in the space between legitimacy and the underworld. But the tightrope was thinner now. The FBI was watching, the gaming board was watching, and the man in the tunnels, Giancana, was becoming harder to hide. The summer of 1962 was the peak, the absolute summit. Not in revenue, not in room bookings, not in any metric that would show up on a balance sheet, but in intensity, in convergence, in the sheer density of fame, power, and danger compressed into 13 acres on a lake. Frank Sinatra owned 50% of the Cal Neva. The celebrity showroom was drawing the biggest acts in entertainment every weekend. The cabins were full of people whose names dominated the tabloids and the front pages in equal measure. The tunnels were busy, the casino was running, the bar was pouring, and the arrangement, the whole impossible, beautiful, doomed arrangement, was still holding together, if barely. Consider what was happening on this property. In a single season, Sinatra was performing, Dean Martin was performing, the Maguire sisters were performing, and one of them was sleeping with the most wanted mob boss in America. Members of the Kennedy family were visiting a lodge partly funded by the same mob boss that the Kennedy Justice Department was investigating. The FBI had agents in the region. The Nevada Gaming Control Board had the Cal Neva on its radar. Governor Grant Sawyer had told the board privately, "Because he is Sinatra, it is obvious that we will have a problem enforcing regulations against him. Do not be intimidated by him." Every thread that made the Cal Neva extraordinary was also a thread that could unravel it. Hollywood, the White House, Chicago, the gaming board, the FBI, all of them converging on the same 13 acres, the same tunnels, the same cabins, the same bar where the state line ran through the floor, and everybody pretended the rules didn't matter. And standing at that summit, looking out at an empire that seemed to bend the laws of gravity as casually as it bent the laws of the state, nobody inside those walls could see the cliff they were standing on. Because the decisions that would destroy everything, all of it, every last piece, were already in motion. They just didn't know it yet. Late in July of 1962, a private plane lifted off from Southern California and headed northeast toward the Sierra Nevada. On board was a woman the whole world recognized, though almost nobody in the world knew how close she was to the edge. Marilyn Monroe had been having a terrible year. She'd been fired from Something's Got to Give, the film that was supposed to be her comeback. She'd undergone surgery for chronic endometriosis. Her affair with Robert Kennedy, which had followed her affair with the president, had ended, and the ending had been ugly. Monroe felt used by the Kennedys, discarded by the very people she'd believed had cared about her. She was depressed, medicated, and struggling in a way that the public, still captivated by the image of the blonde in the white dress, couldn't begin to see. Sinatra sent his plane. The official reason was to discuss a film they might make together. What a way to go. The real reason, by most accounts, was more complicated. Peter and Patricia Kennedy Lawford had invited Monroe for the weekend. Sinatra wanted to help, or Sinatra wanted to manage the situation, or Sinatra wanted to make sure that whatever Monroe knew about the Kennedys stayed quiet. The motives depend on which account you trust, and none of the people who were there that weekend are still alive to settle the question. What's known is this: Monroe arrived at the Cal Neva on or around July 27, 1962. She stayed in cabin 3, the lakeside bungalow with the view. Also present at the lodge that weekend were Sinatra, Dean Martin, Peter and Patricia Lawford, Buddy Greco, a jazz pianist and singer who'd known Monroe since the late 1940s, and, somewhere in the cabins or the tunnels, Sam Giancana and Skinny D'Amato. Greco, who decades later became one of the few people to give a first-hand account of that weekend, remembered seeing Monroe arrive. She stepped out of a limousine wearing sunglasses and a scarf, dressed entirely in green. At first, he didn't recognize her. Then he did. Sinatra introduced them properly, and Monroe, learning that Greco had been the piano player at an audition she'd done years earlier, became emotional and hugged him. For a moment, it seemed like the weekend might be what it was supposed to be: a retreat, a chance to breathe, a few days among friends on a beautiful lake. It wasn't. What happened next is disputed. The accounts don't agree with each other, and some of them have been dismissed by historians as invention or exaggeration. But the broad strokes come through clearly enough to draw a picture that no one disputes. Monroe was not well, and the Cal Neva did not help her. By most accounts, Monroe was mixing pills with alcohol. She became erratic as the evening progressed. One account says that Sinatra, worried about what she might say while intoxicated, had his bodyguard escort escort her from the premises. Another account holds that Monroe was isolated in her cabin, with only Giancana permitted to visit, that even her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio, who was at the lodge trying to reconcile with her, was turned away. According to some sources, Monroe attempted suicide that weekend through a pill overdose and had to be taken to have her stomach pumped. Buddy Greco found her distressed by the pool late at night. He walked her back to her bungalow. He described her as fragile, well beyond fragile. He planned to make sure she got safely back to Los Angeles the next day, but when he called her cabin the following morning, she'd already left. She flew back to LA, appearing, by witnesses' accounts, heavily sedated. Monroe's longtime masseuse, Ralph Roberts, later said she'd called the weekend a nightmare. Skinny D'Amato, the Cal Neva's manager, would later say something else. Something that hangs over the entire weekend, like smoke that never clears. There was more to what happened, he said, than anyone has told. 1 week later, on August 4th, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home. She was 36 years old. The coroner ruled it a probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. The circumstances have been debated, investigated, and mythologized for over 60 years. The questions have never been fully answered. What isn't debatable is this: Cabin 3 at the Cal Neva Lodge was the last place Marilyn Monroe spent a weekend, the last place she was seen among friends, if that's what they were, the last stop before the end. And if you'd walked through the Cal Neva in the years before it closed, a guide would have shown you that cabin, would have pointed to the room where she slept, the path she walked to the pool, the view of the lake she saw from her window. They sold it as history, they sold it as glamour. But what it really was, underneath the legend, was a place where a woman in crisis came looking for something: help, rest, escape, answers, and didn't find it. The Cal Neva had always been a place where the surface and the underneath told different stories. This weekend was the darkest version of that divide. A year after Marilyn's weekend, the Cal Neva's secret came apart in the most mundane way possible. Not through investigation, not through surveillance, through a bar fight. In the summer of 1963, Sam Giancana had disappeared from Chicago. A federal grand jury wanted him to testify. The FBI had been maintaining 24-hour surveillance, so close that Giancana had actually sued the bureau, claiming their agents were disrupting his golf game. A judge stipulated that the FBI had to stay at least one foursome behind Giancana on the course. In a fit of frustration, the bureau turned its surveillance over to local law enforcement. A few hours later, Giancana vanished. He turned up at the Cal Neva. Between July 17th and July 28th, 1963, Giancana stayed in Chalet 50, the cottage assigned to his girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire. The McGuire sisters were slated to perform in the celebrity showroom, and Giancana came along, as he had before, quietly, hidden, a ghost in the tunnels and the cabins. But Giancana, for all his power, had a temper that didn't know how to stay hidden. During his stay, Giancana got into an argument with Victor Collins, Phyllis McGuire's road manager. The details are murky: personal jealousy, professional friction, the kind of tension that builds when powerful men orbit the same woman. What started as words became shouting. What became shouting became fists. The fight was loud enough, public enough, and violent enough to draw attention, the wrong kind of attention. There were undercover FBI agents in the area. Whether they witnessed the fight directly or heard about it through the rapid local gossip chain depends on the source. But the result was the same. Word reached the Nevada Gaming Control Board that Sam Giancana, a man in the black book, a man banned from every casino in the state, had been staying at Frank Sinatra's Cal Neva Lodge for 11 days. There was also the matter of the Christmas Tree Lodge, a small establishment nearby, where Giancana and Phyllis McGuire had stopped after running out of gas. The staff at the Christmas Tree recognized McGuire, though not her companion. They talked, people at Lake Tahoe talked, and by August 2nd, 1963, the Chicago Sun-Times had the story on its front page. The Nevada Gaming Control Board launched a formal investigation, and here is where Sinatra made the decision that sealed everything. The board's chairman was Ed Olson, a former Associated Press reporter who walked with a cane due to childhood polio. Olson was not a man who intimidated easily. He was not a man who was impressed by fame. And when the board began asking questions about Giancana's presence at the Cal Neva, Olson expected cooperation, or at least the appearance of it. What he got instead was Frank Sinatra at his worst. On August 31st, 1963, Sinatra called Olson. The phone call was profane, threatening, and contemptuous. Sinatra reportedly called the chairman a crippled SOB. He issued implied threats. He told Olson to stay out of his business. When the board made clear that Sinatra would need to appear before them and present evidence that he hadn't knowingly allowed a black book member onto his property, Sinatra's response was defiant. "Just you try and find me, and if you do, you can look for a big fat surprise." Meanwhile, Cal Neva employees, whether on Sinatra's orders or their own initiative, attempted to bribe the gaming investigators. It didn't work. Nothing was working. The machinery industry that Sinatra had always been able to charm, bully, or buy was grinding forward regardless. Governor Grant Sawyer had warned the gaming board about Sinatra 3 years earlier, when Sinatra first obtained his casino license. Sawyer's words, delivered in private, carried the weight of a man who understood exactly who he was dealing with. He sets his own rules, he does his own thing, regardless, and he has violated laws with impunity and bought his way out of most problems if he could. Sinatra had met a problem he couldn't buy his way out of. The board gave him a deadline. October 7th, 1963. Present your evidence, make your case, explain how a man in the Black Book lived in one of your cabins for 11 days. The deadline came. Sinatra didn't appear. Instead, his attorney, Harry Claiborne, issued a statement. Frank Sinatra would divest himself completely from the Cal Neva Lodge and from all Nevada casino interests. On October 22, 1963, the gaming board formally revoked Sinatra's license, stating that he had brought discredit to the state's gambling industry. Sinatra was forced to sell his Cal Neva stake and his 9% interest in the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, where he'd been performing for as much as $100,000 a week. His friendship with Hank Sanicola, his longtime business partner and Cal Neva shareholder, ended over the Giancana issue. Sanicola had wanted to distance the lodge from the mob. Sinatra had refused. The friendship, like everything else, was collateral damage. On Labor Day 1963, Sinatra closed the Celebrity Showroom. The last performance, the last show, the room he'd built to hold his voice went quiet. 1 month later, on November 22nd, President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. 3 weeks after that, Sinatra's 19-year-old son, Frank Jr., was kidnapped from Harrah's Lodge at South Lake Tahoe. The kidnappers held him for 54 hours before releasing him unharmed in exchange for $200,000. 1963 was the year everything ended. Not just the Cal Neva, not just Sinatra's casino empire. The entire architecture of power and glamour and secrecy that had connected Hollywood to the White House to Chicago, all of it cracked apart in a single year. The president was dead, the mob boss was hunted, the casino was closed, and the man who'd held it all together, the singer from Hoboken who'd believed he could operate in every world at once, was standing in the wreckage, holding nothing but a revoked license and a list of friendships that had cost him everything. What happened to the Cal Neva after Sinatra left isn't a story of decline. Decline implies a gradual slide, a slow erosion. What happened to the Cal Neva is something stranger and harder to explain. It's a story of a place that seems to resist resurrection, a building that absorbs every dream of revival and returns nothing but silence. Sinatra leased the property to Jack Warner in the mid-1960s, then to a group of investors in 1968. In 1969, a 10-story hotel tower was built on the property, a utilitarian concrete box that had nothing to do with the rustic lodge and its timber beams and stone fireplaces. It loomed over the original structure like a monument to the wrong kind of ambition, and it's still there today, the most visible part of a place that's supposed to be invisible. In 1976, Kirk Kerkorian bought the Cal Neva. Kerkorian was a Las Vegas titan, a major shareholder in MGM, a man who understood casinos and entertainment and the business of spectacle. He convinced Dean Martin to return for a performance. Cary Grant was in the audience. For one night, it must have felt like the old days. The music, the celebrity, the Cal Neva alive again. It didn't last. It never lasted. The lodge fell into disrepair. By 1982, it was closed and vacated. 3 years of emptiness. 3 years of dust settling on the Circle Bar, pine needles accumulating in the parking lot, the tunnels going dark. In 1985, real estate developer Chuck Bluth bought the property. It was in bad shape, Bluth said. It had been let go for who knows how many years. It was ugly. Bluth was a developer, and he looked at the Cal Neva the way developers look at problems, as a challenge. He renovated the exterior. He restored the original look. He leaned into the history, recognizing that the Cal Neva's past was its most valuable asset. The tunnel tours started under Bluth. Saturday nights, visitors walking the same brick-lined passages where Sinatra and Giancana and Monroe had moved decades earlier. Bluth held the Cal Neva for nearly 20 years. But Lake Tahoe's North Shore was changing. The gambling scene was contracting. When Native American casinos began opening in California, they siphoned off the customers who'd once driven up to the mountains for a weekend of cards and slots. The Cal Neva was named Nevada's Best Getaway in 1998 and cited as one of America's 50 flagship hotels, a brief flash of recognition that couldn't reverse the tide. By the early 2000s, the Cal Neva was operating as a shadow of itself. A writer who visited in 2003 described being one of only 8 guests in the entire hotel. The game room was empty, the restaurant was vacant. The only consistent sign of life was a videotape of the Rat Pack that looped on a screen near the reception desk, a ghost playing on repeat in a building that was becoming becoming one. In 2005, Bluth sold to Esri Namvar. That name didn't mean much at the time. It would later. Namvar was eventually convicted of defrauding clients of $21 million and was dubbed the Bernie Madoff of Beverly Hills. By 2009, the Cal Neva's casino revenue had fallen to about half of what it had been in 1992. Canyon Capital Advisors foreclosed on a $25 million loan. A foreclosure auction open to bidders across 2 states generated 0 offers. Not one person wanted to buy the Cal Neva at any price. On March 31, 2010, the Cal Neva ceased operations. The doors closed. The dealers went home. The Circle Bar went dark. Several other North Shore casinos closed around the same time, but none of them carried the weight of the Cal Neva's name, the Cal Neva's history, the Cal Neva's ghosts, and then came the cycle of failed resurrections. In 2013, a Napa-based developer called Criswell Radovan purchased the property and announced an extensive renovation. They raised $20 million in equity, drew down $19 million in loans, and completed roughly 95% of the work. They planned to reopen on what would have been Frank Sinatra's 99th birthday, December 12, 2014. They didn't make it. The city determined that the entire building, foundation, and fire life safety system required a complete overhaul, an expense that made the project impossible. The opening was pushed to Sinatra's 100th birthday in 2015. That didn't happen either. In June 2016, Criswell Radovan filed for bankruptcy, owing more than $27 million to creditors. In 2018, Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison purchased the Cal Neva out of bankruptcy for $35.8 million. Ellison, one of the richest men on the planet, did nothing with it. The property sat. The silence continued. In April 2023, Ellison sold to McWhinney, a Denver-based real estate firm, for approximately $58 million. McWhinney announced plans for a proper branded hotel, 197 rooms, 5 restaurants, a restored showroom, a refined casino. They originally hoped to open by 2026, the Cal Neva's 100th anniversary. The target has slipped to 2027. Construction is progressing. The promise, once again, is the same. We'll bring it back. 6 owners since Sinatra. 6 promises of resurrection. Over 60 years of trying. There's a pattern here that goes beyond bad luck and market timing. The Cal Neva seems to resist a second act, as if the weight of what happened inside it, the secrets, the crimes, the last weekend of Marilyn Monroe, won't allow the building to become something new. Every owner arrives believing they can separate the property from its past. None of them can. The past is the property. It's in the stone fireplace and the timber beams and the tunnels filled with concrete. It's in the name on the showroom. It's in the cabin where Marilyn slept. You can renovate the rooms, you can upgrade the plumbing, but you can't renovate what happened. If you stood on the property at Crystal Bay today, in front of the chain-link fence, looking past the construction equipment toward the lodge and the tower, here's what you'd see. The 10-story hotel tower, built in 1969, still dominates the skyline. It doesn't belong. It never did. It's a concrete slab in a landscape of pine and granite and water, a monument to the era that came after Sinatra, the era that didn't know what the Cal Neva was supposed to be and tried to make it something bigger instead of something better. Behind the tower, the original lodge structure, the one rebuilt in 30 days after the 1937 fire, is still standing. The Indian Room with its cathedral ceiling and exposed beams, the Circle Bar, the celebrity showroom. These are the bones of the Cal Neva, the spaces that Sinatra knew, the rooms where the history lives. Heavy snow in recent winters has caused significant damage. The wood is old, the systems are outdated, but the spaces are there, waiting for something. The cabins, the ones that overlook the lake, the ones where Monroe and Sinatra and Giancana slept, are mostly gone. Of the 37 cabins and hotel rooms that existed at various points outside the main tower, only 5 remain, and those 5 are condemned. The new owners plan to build new structures where the cabins stood, but the originals, including Cabin 3, won't survive. There's asbestos in the walls. The foundations are crumbling. What was once the most exclusive address on Lake Tahoe is now a demolition site. The swimming pool that straddled the state line, where guests swam from California to Nevada, doesn't exist anymore. The new owners are considering an outdoor gathering space in its place. The helipad is gone. The A-frame canopy at the entrance was donated to a nearby state park, and the tunnels, most of them are sealed permanently, filled in during one of the many transitions of ownership. A section beneath the main lodge remains. It's too narrow for modern use, doesn't meet safety codes, has no exits. The developers want to preserve a portion, maybe as a wine cellar, maybe as a whiskey tasting room with historical memorabilia on the walls. There's something about that idea, pouring Cabernet in the passage where Giancana once walked, that captures everything about the Cal Neva's strange afterlife. The past keeps getting reimagined, repackaged, made palatable. But the thing that made the tunnels interesting was never the architecture. It was who walked through them and why. and what they were hiding from. All the original artifacts from the Sinatra era, every photograph, every piece of furniture, every glass and ashtray and playbill have vanished, lost across 6 decades and 6 owners. McWhinney has asked the community for leads. "We'll offer total amnesty," their representative said with a smile. They've hired local artists to reimagine the historical design elements. They're working with the Washoe tribe to properly honor the Indian Room's heritage. They're doing everything right, but there's a gap between what can be restored and what was lost. And it's the same gap that runs through the entire story of the Neva, the gap between the surface and the underneath, between what you can see and what you can't, between the showroom and the tunnels. The lake is still there, still that impossible blue, still surrounded by mountains that don't care about casino licenses or mob bosses or the last weekend of a woman who deserved better than she got. The lake was there before Robert Sherman bought his first acre for $1, and it'll be there long after the last owner of the Neva makes the last promise to bring it back. The Neva Lodge was never really about gambling. It was never about entertainment either. Not really, not at its core. It was about a line painted on a floor, a line that ran through a swimming pool, a line that separated 2 states, and, in doing so, created a space where the ordinary rules didn't apply. From the very beginning, from the moment county sheriffs raided one side and guests stepped to the other, the Neva was a place built on the idea that borders exist to be crossed, that the line between legal and illegal, between fame and infamy, between the world you show the public and the world you hide underground isn't a wall, it's a door. Frank Sinatra understood that better than anyone who ever owned the lodge. He was a man who lived on every border at once, between artist and mogul, between Hoboken and Hollywood, between the White House and the Chicago outfit. He built the Neva in his own image, beautiful on the surface, complex underneath, alive with contradictions that made it irresistible and ultimately unsustainable. He couldn't have one world without the other. The showroom needed the tunnels, the music needed the money, the glamour needed the darkness. For 3 years, he held it all together. 3 years. In the 99-year history of the Neva, Sinatra's golden age lasted 3 years, and it cast a shadow so long that 6 owners in 6 decades haven't been able to step out of it. Marilyn Monroe spent her last weekend in a cabin that's about to be torn down. Sam Giancana, who hid in the tunnels and funded the showroom and broke Sinatra's grip on the place with a bar fight he couldn't control, was shot to death in his home in Oak Park, Illinois. In 1975. He was 67. The Kennedys, Jack and Bobby, were both gone before the decade was out. Peter Lawford drank himself to ruin. Skinny D'Amato never told anyone what more had happened that weekend in July of 1962. He took it with him. Sinatra lived until 1998. In 1981, he stood before the Nevada Gaming Commission and asked for his license back. The panel's questioning was described by a national paper as superficial. Sinatra denied ever having known Giancana. His license was restored. He became an entertainment consultant at Caesar's Palace. He never went back to the Neva. Maybe he understood that some places absorb what happens inside them and don't let go, that you can renovate the rooms and replace the plumbing and hang new art on the walls. But the building remembers. The stone fireplace remembers. The timber beams remember. The tunnels, even the ones filled with concrete, remember. The Neva Lodge sits on 13 acres at Crystal Bay, on the north shore of Lake Tahoe, straddling the border between California and Nevada. It's been closed for over 12 years. A new owner is promising to reopen it by 2027 as a proper hotel with 5 restaurants, a restored showroom, and a refined casino. Maybe they'll succeed. Maybe the Lady of the Lake will finally come back to life. Or maybe the line on the floor will always mean what it meant from the beginning. That some places are built on borders, and borders are the places where things cross over, where fame meets infamy, where glamour meets darkness, where the story you tell the world and the story you bury underground exist side by side, separated by nothing more than a painted line that nobody ever respected. The lake is still blue, the pines are still standing, and in the showroom where Sinatra sang, where the acoustics were perfect, where the brass section played and the champagne flowed and the most famous people in America sat 350 to a room. In that showroom, if you stood there today, you wouldn't hear anything at all, just the quiet, just the sound of a place that held too many secrets, kept too many people's darkness, and never figured out how to let any of it go.